Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where of course today we're talking about letter campaigning. We're talking about so the last sort of various sessions that we've done recently. We've talked about the benefits of off-market opportunities versus on-market opportunities, and talked about how you can really drive those off-market opportunities yourself. So I suppose the trick today is to understand how can we do that, and how can we set up successful letter campaigns. So tell me, with that, I have invited none other than, of course, Simon Lucci here to see me. I'm just trying to ask him to unmute and switch his camera on at the moment, because I think he's there, hopefully. Otherwise, this could be a very short webinar. So, Simon, are you there?
I am definitely here. Yes,
there
indeed.
You are. Oh, just to keep me on my toes, clearly. So for those that you don't know Simon, Simon is, of course, a property investor and developer in his own right. He's the founder of one of the UK's largest training companies. He's got his own mastermind. He's the founder of a thing called PIN, Property Investor Network, and of course co-founder of really quite an exciting company called Crowd Property too. So got quite a lot of stuff going on, Simon. And I suppose for those of you who don't know Simon, I suppose let's just sort of perhaps ask a searching question. So why, with all that stuff going on, Simon, why training? Why teach people? What is it that kind of gets you excited about that?
Well, it's a great question, really, Paul. And sometimes I'm often asked, and people sometimes in a bit of a cynic, I know you're not doing it, but sometimes cynical. I say, oh, well, if you make so much money, why are you training people? I guess it's the same thing. Why are you creating this incredible map product for people? And I think it's about, first of all, following what your passion is, doing what you love. And I think if you give lots of value to other people, you will get lots of value back to yourself. And so when I became financially independent from my property back in 2003, people were asking me, well, how did you do that, Simon? And so I started to explain, and I realized actually I quite enjoyed training. What I really loved, Paul, actually, was I loved it when I would share some knowledge with people and some information. They'd go out, they'd take action, and they come back and say, Simon, I did what you said and it worked. And I got a real buzz out of the fact that actually I've helped change that person's life. Now they've done the hard work, but maybe we've got them thinking in a different way. Maybe we've given them, the extra 10% that they didn't already know that's made all the difference. So I started teaching back in 2003, and I've been doing it ever since. And actually, I've actually sold my business. It's kind of fairly well published in the property press for quite a lot of money. So I really don't have to do any of this, but I've agreed to stay on for 3 years because actually I love the training. That's what I do. And Crowd Property is also quite a valuable business. So I really don't need to do anything again. But you know what? I would go very, very bored sitting around doing nothing. So I just fill my time doing stuff that I love to do. And that's basically what I teach.
Amazing. Cool. Well, let's jump into letter campaign if we could. Let's start looking at, well, how do we do it? What's the right thing to do? How do we write to owners, process, planning, all that kind of good stuff, really. And I guess kind of when that letter campaign starts being successful, kind of what do we do, and how do we kind of build that rapport with the owner if we could?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just share some slides very quickly with you guys. So, I mean, you've done a pretty good introduction, to be honest, Paul, but let me just mention a couple of things in there that I think are probably relevant. So I started investing back in 1995, so that's a very, very long time. And it's when I got my first graduate training position at Cadbury's in Birmingham. I come from Kent originally, came to Birmingham University, stayed up here, and finally got a job after a year of not having a good graduate job. And as soon as I got that job, I bought a house to live in for myself, and I rented out 2 of the rooms to my friends who were still at uni. So I kind of became a live-in landlord. And that was interesting because I realized I was kind of living for free, saving lots of my salary, and also had a part-time job, as a part-time business, running nightclub events in Birmingham, which was a really good, fun business to do at that time. And so I had this money building in my business bank account, and I decided to buy a second property. I moved out the first one. It is in Selly Oak in Birmingham, turned it into a student HMO back in 1998, before the term HMO had even been invented, I guess. And bought another house. I moved into closer to Cadbury's with my friends. And that's kind of how it started. And I had this light bulb moment. And a lot of people watching this training, I know developers, a lot of your clients, they might buy something, develop it and sell it on. And I've done a fair amount of that over the years. But you know what? Whenever you sell something, actually you crystallize the profit. You're never going to make any more money from it. Whereas the great thing about holding property long term is that every single month you get paid some money. And this property, all my employees have been paying me every single month for as long as I own them, and as well as the long-term growth. And I can still benefit from that growth by refinancing, taking some money out, going buy some more property, or do whatever I want to do. So for me, it's the point that you can create a truly passive asset that gives you money every single month. And people say, yeah, but I don't want to deal with tenants. Well, I don't want to deal with tenants, so I don't. I have people who I pay to do that for me, letting agents and property managers. And you know what? Yes, that costs a little bit of money, but I get my time back, my freedom to do what I really want to do. And I think for most people investing in property, it's not just about making money, it's about having the choice and freedom. And that's the most important thing, that time element, I think. So anyway, back to 2001, I left my job. I hadn't quite replaced my income, but I pretty much got there. By 2000, I'd completely replaced my income. And I realized that although I'd done okay, property felt really lonely. All my friends were still working, mainly at Cadbury's, and also my family never invested apart from their own homes. And I started investing in myself and my own personal development. And I realized from Tony Robbins that actually environment is really important. You become like the people around you. And I thought, hang on, I've got no one around me to aspire to help me. So that's why I set up PIN. So PIN is the very first networking in the entire UK for property investors back in 2003. It's now the largest organization, I think 52 meetings around the country, mainly virtual. There are some live as we record this, and we're going back to more live in the next few months. But from that, really, I wanted to build my own network and connect with other like-minded people. And I've learned a huge amount from going to those meetings myself that I've applied, and also we've been able to help and shape many people's property journeys as a result of that. Started training back then I created my mastermind program, which is a year-long mastermind for people who want to go to the next level. I wrote a book called Property Magic, which hopefully many people have read. If not, you should absolutely get a copy. If you've read it, by the way, go and reread it. You'll notice things that the first time you missed. It's currently in its 6th edition because the market keeps changing, and I'm probably going to have to do another one next year because of the changes over the last 18 months. Now, I'm still investing in property actively for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's very important. If you're teaching anyone, you want to be that cold face, know what's going on. So that's one reason. Secondly, there are some amazing opportunities out there. Thirdly, you can make some really good money from it. This is a commercial to residential conversion. It was a large care home up in the Northeast, turned into 45 apartments. Interestingly, this particular deal, I've never ever stepped foot inside that building, and I didn't use my money to fund it. Someone brought it to me who was a joint venture partner. They found it. I've worked them before, trust them. They knew what they were doing. They did all the work. I got the money in, but it was private finance as well. So it wasn't my money. So, you know, again, your network that's someone I just know through networking. So the more people you know in your network, the more successful I believe you're going to be. And as you mentioned, in 2014, I founded, with some co-founders, Crowd Property, which has become a substantial lender now. We've lent over 150 million. We just secured another 300 million. And it's all the kind of projects that your clients do, Paul. It's where you're adding value to a property, commercial to residential conversions, or houses to HMOs, those kind of strategies. Crowd Property can fund. It's like a bridging company. So it funds slightly at a higher rate than a normal bank, but we get property. We do things very quickly. So that's me. I don't know everything about property, far from it. I'm still learning all the time because I'm still doing it. But I've helped thousands of people, no matter what level, become far more successful. And I think it's important whenever you speak to anyone. I know, Paul, you wouldn't just invite anyone on, but whenever you watch a video or listen to a podcast, you've got to make sure people know what they're talking about, because lots of people are popping up trying to teach property, and actually they haven't really been doing it that long themselves. Now, what we're going to talk about, and obviously when you found great opportunities on Nimbus Maps, which you absolutely should be doing, one of the best ways is just reaching out to those property owners. Now, very often these are going to be properties that are not actually on the market. You know, they're there, someone owns it, you've identified through Nimbus the opportunity and the contact details. You write out to those people, whether it's a company or an individual, and see if they're interested in maybe selling their property. Now, you've got to understand, this is a numbers game. Out of every 100 letters you send, maybe only 10% of those will actually bother to reply. And some will bother to reply, so, well, actually, no, I'm not interested, but thanks for writing. Very nice of them to come back like that. But a handful will say, well, yeah, I'm interested. What are you looking at? And so you've got to recognize, sometimes people will send out one letter and they don't get a response, think, oh, well, that doesn't bloody work. Well, it's probably not going to work. So it is a numbers game. You must understand this. So this is a standard template that we give our students. We've had people just send out the standard template. However, I don't recommend you do that. You want to personalize it a little bit. Let me take you through what you might want to put in a letter. So first of all, it's important to write to their home address. If you send it to the address of the actual property, the rental property, or it might be a commercial unit, they might not actually get that letter. So on land registry, find out their home address, or you do a bit of detective work, knock on the doors, ask the neighbors, etc., and someone will know who owns this property. But land registry is the easiest way. Mention how you found them. Maybe it's I live in the area, I noticed your property, or we do a lot of letters from the HMO register at the council, and so we'll get that information and send out letters to all those people. And here's the thing about an HMO landlord: they probably don't just have one property. HMOs is a more advanced strategy. Only a small number of landlords actually do it, but they're generally the more advanced ones. And so they could have blocks of flats, single lets, whatever. So we want to write to them and ask them if they have this property or any other properties they might be interested in selling. So we'd put the actual property address that we're talking about, because they might have lots. And in the letter, by the way, we don't just say, would you like to sell? We say, would you like to rent your property or sell? Because there might be landlords who are distant landlords, remote in other words. Maybe they've inherited a property, they don't really know what they're doing, and actually they're fed up of it. They don't want to sell it at the moment, but they might want to rent it. So we could do something like rent to rent. We could do a purchase lease option, or indeed just a normal straightforward purchase. But it's important to keep it really open. Don't narrow down what you're looking for, because otherwise people may not come back to you. And the whole point is, you want them to call you. You just want to have a conversation and a chat. We'll talk about what you might say. And that's just the starting point, really. I'd always ask about other properties, saying, look, you've got this project or any others we're interested in, having a chat to you. And the call to action, I said, is to phone you. You don't want to send them to a website, because if they go to a website, they go online, you can absolutely find deals through websites. But the problem is, if you're driving someone from offline, i.e. a letter, online, there's a very good chance they could go and Google, oh, I wonder if there's anyone else who might buy my house, and they will find your competition online who are trying to do that. So the call to action really is just to call you and have a conversation. Now, many of my students freak out at the idea of a property owner calling them and having a conversation, but it's just a chat. And we'll talk about some of the things you might want to find out and how you actually do that. But that's the process of doing the letters. Now, mistake people make, they send just one letter. And you might be lucky. We get some people to send out letters on their first batch of letters. They do get some responses coming in, and sometimes they get some leads and deals, but it probably won't happen like that. So you've got to recognize that they might not actually get that first letter. Maybe they get it and it's not the right time for them, or maybe it is the right time. They put it on their to-do pile and they never quite get around to calling you, because it's not an urgent thing. It's a kind of a nice to do kind of thing. So it's got to be a series of letters, a campaign of letters. I'd suggest probably a minimum 3, maybe even 5, spaced out over a couple of months period. It's interesting to note that we've also had people who've sent letter campaigns out and they've moved to a different area, and they've had a call sometimes up to 2 years later by someone who's held on to a letter saying, well, I don't want to sell now, but I'll just keep that in case I do want to sell in the future. So that can absolutely happen as well.
And for me, those letters are they're almost like lottery tickets. They're just so hard to throw away, because actually it only takes one buyer to pay me more than my building's worth, and I can make 10, 20, 30, 100 grand, £1 million more, depending on the lot size of the building that you're writing on. So they're very hard to throw those things away. And of course, if I then do want to sell it, then we'll pick the phone up and have a call. And so it's very much sort of, the things that do stay. There's kind of a wave of stuff that comes back, and this sort of long tail that, as you say, it can be 2 years later that someone will pick the phone up because I can't chuck a lottery ticket away. Yeah,
the problem here is, Paul, is most people, they don't know how to do this properly, and so they don't do it properly, or they get impatient, or a combination of the two. But when we've had and I'll actually share some case studies, we've had so many phenomenal results from this. It just works if you if you do it in the right way. And actually persistence shows you're serious. I'm going to share with you a case study in a moment. And this person, they sent out a standard boiler template. So they didn't quite listen to what we said because they didn't adjust it. But they sent out the standard one, and they actually did a batch, and they'd sent out about 3. And this one landlord came back to them and saying, "Hey, look, you sent me this letter. Someone else has sent me exactly the same letter. Are you working with them?" Because obviously it's someone who's done our training and picked up the same template. And again, not quite listened. Where I said, "Look, just tweak it, change it slightly to personalize it." And Rob went back and said, no, that's not me. I don't know who that is, but I've done some training. So maybe they've done the same training as me, etc. But let's talk about your property. And the landlord actually said, well, the reason I've come to you is you sent me 3 letters. I like that. I like that persistence. I think it just shows you're a serious contender. How many estate agents think that actually investors are a waste of space? Because there are so many investors who are a waste of space. They go in once, they make a low offer, and the agent never sees them again. Whereas someone's turning up regularly, building a relationship, doing lots of viewings, making serious offers, etc., that agent's going to take them more serious. So by showing some commitment and persistence, you just come across as a more successful, serious person. And we know when our students have asked us, absolutely one of the reasons why they've called them instead of called someone in the first place. Now, you might think, well, hang on a minute, but surely everyone's doing this. Now, I tell everyone, because this is a great track, but there's a big difference between knowing something and actually doing it. So most people don't bother to do this. Lots are, but most don't, or they don't do it properly. So don't worry about the competition. And actually, if other people are sending letters, in a way that's kind of warming that person up to the concept of maybe selling this property. So don't see it as a bad thing. As long as you're doing a campaign and not sending one, and you keep doing it, you will get some results. Now, when they come back to you, it's all about having a conversation. And actually, before diving in about their property, you want to kind of connect with them, build this rapport, and really find out what's going on for them. So there are some questions I'm just going to give you here that some of them are absolutely obvious, and you think about this, but some you may not think. I'll explain the psychology behind all of them. So why are you selling this property? We want to understand a bit about their motivation. Maybe they're selling because they're just retiring. Maybe they're selling because they're trying to sell one a year to use the tax benefits. Maybe they're just fed up. They've inherited the property and it's real pain. Let's get an understanding of what's driving them to get rid of property. Because look, we're all investors. We like to keep property. So I wonder, why are you selling this particular one? Another question, which is great to understand, are they under any time pressure, is, are there any time scales you're working to? Well, actually, yeah, I need to sell it within a certain time period or within a certain date. So that's good because that understands how flexible and motivated that seller might be. Now, this is a really powerful question. You might want to write this down. Listen carefully. We say, what's more important to you? Getting the property sold as fast as possible to get the money in the bank, or making as much as you can from the property? Okay. Now, what this suggests is, well, do you want to sell it quickly and get the money in the bank? Or do you want to make as much as you can? So it suggests if they're going to take a bit longer, they might make more money. And Paul, we've talked about how people can use things like purchase options, whereby you find someone who wants to sell and you say, look, I'll tell you what, actually, I can give you maybe more than other people might give you if you're prepared to wait. And so you could do things like get planning permission on a property, have an uplift. You might change the existing planning to a better scheme and thus increase the value. You could actually do things like an exchange with delayed completion, where you get a key undertaking, come in, do the work, and then you're buying the property that's really had value enhanced. So lots of different things you can do, but this just helps you understand the flexibility. And actually, no, I really need the money as quick as possible. Okay, that's probably going to be a lower offer. Or actually, I don't need the money now. We might be able to offer them more money, but if they're prepared to wait a little bit of time. And I can't go into all the creative finance strategies that we use, but if they're prepared to wait and they want a bit more money, we can absolutely give them that, sometimes without costing you a single penny extra, because we can sometimes pay from the cash flow of the property. We give them a certain amount up front, and then the rest we give them out of the cash flow. If someone sold a property, obviously they'd lose all the cash flow from it, and we can give them a little bit of that. You add that up over a period of time, we're giving them more money for the property than they would get if they just sold it to someone else outright now. But the thing is, we can never make assumptions. We don't know what these people want and what they don't want. That's why we need to ask these questions. Now, once you've built a little bit of rapport with them, and they might tell you this, but I definitely want to find out, what are they going to do with the proceeds from the sale? Again, that's important because if they're going to go and pay down some other debt, or they're going to pay for their daughter's wedding, whatever it might be, well, they need to sell it within a certain period of time, and they actually need the money. If they don't need the money, great, we can, instead of them putting it in the bank, we can maybe give them a better return and sort out some sort of creative finance, which means you have to put less money into that deal. Now, one of my favorite questions, and I encourage everyone to write this question down. This question will save you tens of thousands of pounds. So write this question down. So I want to make sure you get lots of value for being here today, watching this live. What's the lowest you will accept and still be happy? Now that's really powerful, because we're not saying, well, what's the lowest you would take? Sounds like it's all about me. I want to pay as little as I possibly can for it. What's the lowest you're going to take? And it's a bit of an abrupt question. Whereas if you say, look, obviously I want to get a deal, you want to make, it's got to work for you as well. But I'm curious, what's the lowest you would accept and still be happy? So you're trying to convey that we're trying to find this win-win that's going to work for you and also work for them. You see, it's all very well sending out a campaign of letters, which absolutely does work. But the problem is you need to know what to say to that person and build a relationship and fact find, so that you're not just like anyone else who's trying to buy the property. And then this is, and by the way, I've seen people drop £20,000 by just asking that simple question. What's the lowest you'll accept and still be happy? They're saying 120. Well, ask that question, drops down to 100,000. It's incredibly powerful. You can only use that, by the way, once you built some rapport. Don't drop that in straight away to the conversation. You've got to build a rapport, get on with them. And very often we teach our students to meet the person and chat all about them and their life and what's going on for them before you ask anything about the property. And then it's almost like, oh, well, do you want to know about this property? Oh, I suppose, yeah, we should talk about that, really. And that's very much the casual conversation we have. And then a question I like to ask towards the end of the conversation with a property owner is, do you have any other properties? You see, this property we're talking about may or may not be a suitable deal, but they might have other things that might well be that we're not aware of. So it's such a simple question to ask. And we've had a lot of people that have done multiple deals with landlords because they've asked that very simple question. So the language you use, what you say to landlords is important. In case you're kind of worrying about what you say, it's just a case of practice. The more letters you send, the more conversations you will have, the better you will get at being more confident and also finding a great win-win solution for those people. Now,
I think I was going to mention as part of that, on that sort of previous slide, is that there's so many things you can do around that sort of purchase that actually just listening to what they're saying, it's one thing asking the question, the second thing is listening and acting on what they're, and shaping your proposal in line with what they've told you around those things. It sounds obvious, but I felt like it's kind of, it's worth explaining.
It's a great point to bring up, Paul. I'll tell you why. Many investors say, right, I've got my list of questions, I'm going to ask all these questions. And my view is, okay, it's okay to have a checklist, maybe some of the things you want to ask, but try not to have a questionnaire. Try not to make it feel like an interview. You're not interviewing this person for a job. You're trying to build a rapport relationship, see if there's some sort of deal you could do together. And people are going to do a deal if they like and trust you. If they don't trust you or like you, they're not going to do a deal. And so it's about having this conversation. So rather than say, right, here's my first question, here's my second question. Well, the second question you ask based very much on what they responded to the first question. So just be careful of not trying to have a script that you're sticking to religiously. As you quite rightly said, it's about asking a question, listening very careful. We've got one mouth and two ears, and we should use them in that proportion. Might sound right for me because I'm just chucking out loads of content and trying to get as much as we can out in the time, and we'll have time for questions later. But the point is, you're not trying to talk them into something. You're asking them great questions, listening to what they say, and seeing if there's a win-win for you and also for them. So really good point.
As you say, it's not the talking them into something, it's the what will they be receptive to, and then putting that to them.
And if you're careful not to have assumptions, which most people have, right? you're not assuming what they will or won't want. We don't know. We've got to ask them and listen very carefully. And very often they will tell you what they want. And if we can shape a deal that gives them what they want, they're going to be far more likely to give you what you want. And don't assume that it's always whoever pays the most. Often that is the case, but there are all sorts of other things. They might want to maybe exchange with delayed completion, so they've got time to go and find somewhere else. They might want some other sort of flexibility. So it's not just about price. If it's someone who's negotiating just on price, they're not really motivated. That's not the kind of person we want to work with, really. Now, something so important, and this is kind of part of having a campaign of letters, but once you've actually spoken to someone, it's very important to follow up. It's unlikely that the very first time you speak to someone, you're going to strike a deal. That's probably not going to be the case. At first, you're just building that rapport and seeing as some sort of common ground there. So they might say, oh, let me think about it. Okay, fine. But don't rely on them coming back to you. You want to follow up with them. And remember, each time you contact them is another chance to further progress that relationship and deepen the bond with them. They might not be motivated enough now. They might have responded to your letter out of curiosity or courtesy, but they're not really motivated, and that's fine. Only maybe 5% of landlords and property owners are the ones we want to work with, the really motivated ones. So we just keep in touch with them. And so maybe we send them a text or an email once a month. Hey, we spoke about property. How are you doing? Just wonder what's going on for you. And the reason that's important is because time helps most sellers become more motivated. They become more motivated with time. Really important to understand that. And often it's not all about the money. As I said, there are other factors. And so by listening in, we've had lots of people who've not made the highest offer, but they've beaten other people who've offered more money because the owner trusts them, they like them, they believe they're going to actually deliver on the deal, and you know, they built that rapport. So just really, really important to say it's not just about the money. There are other things that might be more important to them. If they don't need the money now, they might be open to like creative finance or something like that. Now, I want to give you two very quick case studies just to show you just how powerful writing to landlords can be. Because you might think, oh, I've heard about that. I've tried it. It didn't really work. Well, you've got to persist. And these are two great. We've got lots of case studies, but here are just two particularly relevant ones. So this is Dr. Tim Percival. He's one of the people who came on our mastermind program. He was a full-time GP with, you know, wife, dog, couple of kids, another kid on the way, ill mother living with him at times. So he was a pretty busy guy, right? And he started doing HMOs because he realized that was the way for him to replace his significant income. Very high-end HMOs. There was an oversupply of HMOs generally. By the way, if you're writing to HMO landlords, that's good because a lot of them are struggling because they've got very average HMOs. But you can pick up those fully licensed HMOs, do a little bit of a light cosmetic improvement on them, and suddenly they're far more desirable than the very average property they were trying to rent out. So this guy, I'll show you the properties actually. So this is in Bristol, very expensive area. This is the Clifton Suspension Bridge. You've probably seen this picture before. You're probably familiar with this. And on the right-hand side of the bottom, there are these lovely, I think they're Georgian houses, okay? 4-story buildings. And Tim would go past these every day on his way to work as a GP. And he'd often thought, oh, I'd love to own one of those. Never thought it would be possible because they're pretty expensive properties. And then he saw a to let sign outside the property. So look, there are lots of ways of finding properties. Nimbus Maps can do it, but also just getting out in your local area, walking around is a good idea. And he saw this to let sign. And if there's a to let sign outside a property, it generally means that maybe there's an empty property, or it was a student property. So they were advertising for the next academic year. But anyway, Tim went on to, he actually had the HMO list. So he went on, looked it up, found out what the owners are called, went on to Land Registry, got the details, found out it was actually a company based in the Midlands. Now, this property is in Bristol, they're in the Midlands, and he thought, well, they might be interested in selling. So he wrote a letter, very personalised letter, talking about the street and everything. And the MD got this letter, and he decided to meet up with Tim because only the week before, the board had decided they had this one property in Bristol, one in Cardiff, and the rest were in the Midlands. And every time there was a problem, they would have to send people all the way down from Birmingham down to Bristol, and he would take at least half a day. So they didn't have any people on the ground down there. And the owner said, look, the property rents really easily all the time. That's not the problem. It's because it's just a bit of a pain, a bit of a hassle. And the property was in a reasonable condition. And so they actually agreed a private off-market sale. Now, I'm going to show you a figure in a minute. Might people go, oh, I couldn't possibly afford that. But there's a bit more to the story, so bear with me. So they agreed to buy the property for £720,000. Now, bear in mind, this is a 16-bed student HMO, so it has significant income coming into the property. And it needed several £100,000 spent. Now, Tim did have some money when he first started. He had a little bit of savings. He released equity from his home, which is what most people do. And that he used to invest in himself to do the training, but also used for his first few deals. I think this was probably his 4th or 5th deal in his year-long program. So he'd run out of his own money by then. And one thing we teach people is to, if you find good deals, and that's the key, you've got to be able to find good deals. If you find good deals, there are always other people who might fund those who don't have the time, the energy, the knowledge, etc. So Tim didn't put any of his own money into this property. A couple of $100,000 of other people's money to buy the property. They didn't do much to it. All he did was raise the rents to the market value. You see, this Midlands company was charging something like $350 per room, which was the rate up in the Midlands, but actually the room should rent for at least $500, $550 per room. But they didn't know that because they weren't local. And Tim obviously didn't tell them. He thought, well, I could just raise the rents and make a lot more money in this property. So that's what he did. And he now makes on this one property, in fact, I think it's slightly more than this, I need to update the slide, but £4,500 a month on a property that he just found through a landlord's letter. He wrote to the landlord, and he basically doesn't have any of his own money invested. Now, what about the couple of £100,000 invested? Well, he's paying a return to the investors on that, but still, it's 26% return on investment. If you find a good property deal, what you can do is obviously you can afford to make money yourself, but also pay some to someone else. And so this has gone up in value over the last couple of years. Tim's actually got planning permission. It's a listed building, he's got planning permission to improve it. He's going to pick the value up probably to over £1 million by spending about 150 on it. So again, he's probably going to refinance and get all the money out actually. So great example. Someone could have seen that property, done nothing about it, but he just sent a landlord letter, and it was just, this was a lucky one maybe. This wasn't the only letter he sent, but a phenomenal deal. Paul, would you be happy with 26% on HMO?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not a bad return, right? Let me give you another more recent example. I'll just do one more. So this is Rob. Now, Rob lives in London, but he's investing in Sheffield. And partly because you can find deals in London, but there's more competition and the price is higher, etc. So because he comes from Sheffield, that's where he thought he would invest. Now, by the way, this is the guy who just sent out the standard template letter. He didn't make any changes. We suggest you do that. And he did the campaign. The landlord said, oh, I've had 3 letters from you. This other letter from someone else, is he something to do with you? And Rob said, no, he's not. So Rob spoke to the owner, and this guy had a real problem. And I won't go into all the details, but to summarize it, this landlord had a property where there was negative equity. So the value of the property was about £300,000. It's a 7-bed, fully licensed HMO. And it had a contract on there to a charity that basically housed people. So it was a lower rental income, but the full rental income when used as an HMO should be about £2,800 a month, okay? But there was this lower income of, I think, about £1,300. But the biggest problem was the debt on the property was worth more than the value of the property. £500,000 plus was owed to the mortgage company. How did that happen? Well, the property was bought originally from a deal sourcer who packaged it up and sold it. And actually, he did loads of deals, and unfortunately, it was a bit of a con. There was a surveyor in on it, and they were it was in the 2006, 2007, when the market was booming like it is now. They had a surveyor on board who was getting a backhander. He was overvaluing properties. So when the bank would come to value it, they'd send the surveyor out, obviously not knowing he was a bench surveyor. He would value it higher than it's worth, and they would give a mortgage based on that valuation. So the guy who developed it was making a huge profit and paying the surveyor. So it was a bit of a big scam. And scams happen in property, unfortunately, because you can make money, and anyway you can make money, there was a scam. There were always going to be some sort of scams. But anyway, so the point was that when the owner found out about this, when it all came out, and I think the guy went to jail in the end, the owner went to the bank and said, hang on a minute, so this has been massively overvalued. And the bank said, well, it's not our fault. And the owner said, well, yes, it is, because you instructed the surveyor. I paid for them on your behalf, but it was a survey for you and you've instructed them. So, it's your fault. So the owner just stopped paying the mortgage. So the mortgage was higher than the value anyway. Then he stopped paying it for the last 10 years. So that's why it's £500,000. And he's been to court several times with the bank. Now, the bank kind of recognized, okay, it was a con, it wasn't our fault, but maybe we should have double check these valuations a little bit. Our underwriters should have picked that up. Maybe they didn't. So they kind of admitted a bit of a challenge. And rather than the owner having to pay the 500,000, well, if you sell the property, they agreed to take a lower amount. Okay, so no, this case doesn't happen all the time. It's just an example of someone who's got a problem that they're struggling to sell, but Rob can come along and buy this property at a discounted rate. And bear in mind, this was this year. This is in 2021, when the market's booming and many people will say, oh, you can't buy property because there are too many people buying, the price is too high. Well, I agree, prices are high and there's lots of competition, but this is an off market. This wasn't even on the market. Now, the owner had sold it to someone else. That sale, for whatever reason, fell through, and Rob was following up. He kept in touch. So this year, he's actually bought this property, which was agreed by the bank. They said, well, if you pay this amount, we'll kind of write off the debt for this owner. £160,000. So the bank's taking a huge write-off. The actual value's 300. Rob's buying it at a huge 45% discount. It's not on the open market. It's achieved by sending letters to people. Whether you found people on Nimbus Maps, whatever it might be, send letters to people, send a lot of letters, make it a campaign, and these are the kind of things. Now, Rob's actually used other people's money to fund this. He used some bridging finance. I think Crowd Property actually helped him with the majority. He's had to put a little bit of private investor money in. So this is a no money down deal for Rob. Currently, there's a 3-year contract on there at quite a low rent, say 1,300, and the rent should be more than that, should be more like 2,800. But he's buying it with his bridging and private loan. After 8 months, he's going to refinance it and getting a 65% loan to value mortgage. He's going to pay back the bridging to Crowd Property, pay back the finance, have a property with over £100,000 of equity in it. And also, but when this contract ends, probably going to give him £1,000 profit per month. So just another example of how getting out to landlords and knowing what to say to them and finding a great solution for them just absolutely works. So if you are not using letters to reach out to people you might have found on Nimbus Map or whatever, if you're not doing that, you are probably missing out some great deals in your area that most people are completely unaware of. Paul, any questions about those case studies before I've got a couple of gifts for people? And we go to questions.
Very interesting, very interesting, very interesting. I guess the question is, where do we find these deals? So I'll perhaps kind of shed some light on that in a minute. But
well, absolutely, I knew you would help people on that. So final thing, guys, I hope this has kind of been enlightening, and Paul's going to do a bit. I'm going to do some Q&A as well. Very quickly, to find good deals, you need to know how to find them. To do good deals, you need to know how to find them. And obviously, Nimbus Maps is one of the ways you can do that. We have some training about deal sourcing, and we actually previously just recorded a training where Paul's been showing people how to use Nimbus Maps to find great deals. So you can absolutely do that. And there are lots of other ways as well. So I'm actually doing, and you might want to get your phones out and you can scan this QR code on the screen. So if you open your camera, hold your camera up to the slide, it will take you through to a page where actually you can come and register for some live online training. I've got a bit more time to really go into how you can find great deals. And actually there's a link, which I think one of the team might share in the chat box as well. You can also click on the link if you don't want to use your phone and go to that page and come and join me for some live training where I will explain about how do you find great deals in your area. And a lot of people worry about, well, how am I going to fund deals? And the reality is, when you know how to find really good deals, there are lots of people who fund those for, and I'm going to touch on that as well on that training. So that's my first gift from you. It is happening quite soon, so I would take action as Hopefully you're watching this live, we're watching the recording. I'll take action as soon as possible, otherwise you're going to miss the live training. The other thing is, I mentioned pin meetings. If you've not been to a pin meeting before, why not? You should definitely come along. You can go to pinmeeting.co.uk, see the 52 locations around the country. Now it's it's £20 to come to a pin meeting, either physical or online. However, thanks to Paul and the guys at Nimbus Maps, if you've not been before, you can come for your very first time completely free of charge as their gift. You just go to the pinmeeting.co.uk, you pick the local meeting to you, it will explain if it's virtual or physical. Scroll down to the bottom where you pay, and where you pay, click on use voucher code, and then it'll ask you to put your details in, and the code you need is Nimbus Maps. We had to think long and hard about that creative code to use for Paul and his clients. And then finally, if you haven't read Property Magic, you can go and get it on Amazon, or you can listen on Audible. They have it as well. Or you just go to this website, propertymagicbook.com, pay the £3.95 for post and packaging, and we'll send it to you anywhere in the UK. So just a few little gifts from me. I think Paul will probably share some of these links, or certainly the free training later on with you. Paul, I'll hand back to you. Maybe you could talk about how we can find some of these people using Nimbus Maps.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that I suppose I wanted to sort of pick up on really was is how do we find this stuff, and how does Nimbus help with all of this? And I suppose there's a bit of me that kind of feels like we should do the deal in 90 seconds. So what I would like to do is I'd like to ask you, the audience, to open up the chat function, put a location into there, and what I'll do is I'll go off and I'll find 3 different types of deals. I'll do those in 90 seconds and sort of show you how that works. And the second thing I want to do is then just do this thing called story time. So I want to kind of just paint the picture around the deals that we find, and paint the picture around kind of how we can start to understand some of the stakeholders behind it, perhaps what the marketplace is around those locations, and just start to bring all that to life for you. So thank you all for doing that. That's kind of sparked up the
there's lots of interest there, Paul. Lots of
there's quite a lot going on. So Simon, do you want to sort of open up and just pick one of those locations?
So it looks like Reading is the first one.
Then
you've got Greenford and you've got Ealing.
Well, I suppose what I like to do to start with, sort of whenever I'm doing this, is just to get a feel for the area that we're looking at, really. So so I don't know Reading very well at all. I've been there once or twice, but don't know it as a place, don't know it as an investor or anything like that. So this is the elite max system in effect. It's elite, and elite max sort of brings in elite plus, and elite max gives us these strategy things that we can use, and I'm going to use those in a second to find some sites for you. But in essence, with the sort of the elite platform, so the basic platform, we get access to this thing called the market overlay. So the first thing I want to understand is I want to put on this thing called the average value overlay in effect. So what this does, it looks at plotting neighborhood boundaries across the map for me. And off the back of plotting those neighborhood boundaries, what it then does is, well, what are the houses that have sold in those locations? How big were they? And what was the rate per square foot that they sold for? And then plots it on the map for me, and it color codes it to say the warmer the color, the better the area in effect. So as I'm looking at Reading, what I can see is that downtown Reading, if you like, has got an average sale price of 360 quid a foot. As I go north, that number adds 10%. So as we start going to lower Caversham and Caversham further north, and this sort of Caversham Heights, those values go up and up and up, actually. And actually, if we kind of look up at Caversham Heights up here, we're kind of nearly 30% higher, actually, in that kind of pocket of a really good part of Reading. As we go south, on the other hand, those values drop off by 10% and off go kind of west, and actually it drops off even further in effect. So depending on what kind of deal I'm looking for, what kind of opportunity I'm looking for, I might want to target different parts of town. If I'm doing a nice new executive home scheme for perhaps a nice new infill plot, back garden, side garden, corner plot kind of development, I want to search in those good parts of town up north. If I'm doing maybe an HMO scheme, I might look in the centre of town, and possibly a little bit in some of those sort of southern areas. Maybe might kind of think about some of that. I'm not sure. We'll have a look at that. If I was doing an affordable scheme, I'd certainly go and look in those kind of bluer areas where sort of the demographics are weaker in effect. So first, give me that little snapshot of where I should start looking. Second thing I might have a little look at is seeing, well, where are the HMOs? And actually, I might look at those two things together, actually, and sort of see, well, where do the HMOs cluster? Because actually, where the HMOs are means there's an HMO marketplace for them, which means that when I bring my nice new scheme forwards, I know that there's then a marketplace for those individual rooms that I'm going to create perhaps in an HMO environment, in effect. So very quickly, I'm starting to see whereabouts I should be searching for these particular opportunities. I guess starting then to look at what those opportunities might be. I guess we have sort of three key things here we talk about at Nimbus. We talk about commercial conversions being a big thing at the moment. Those commercial conversions being such a big thing because of the new use class order that's being announced, the new changes to the PD rights that sit alongside all of that. So there's a new thing called Class MA, the old Class G being updated into this new kind of Super G Class G PD rights, where we can convert the upper parts of Class E buildings now into residential. And of course, some of those airspace rights and things like Class ZA and that sort of stuff. So the commercial conversion things is a really interesting thing. Equally, residential land and airspace, again, those are also very interesting at the moment. And of course, the HMO opportunities. So I want to kind of bring each of those kind of three things to life for you, just to give you a feel for how we might find this. Because one of the key things we need to do to get our letter campaigning working well is to be able to find those 100 sites. I need to be able to find 100 opportunities that actually work. And those opportunities work if they work financially, and they work if they work in planning terms too. So I need to have some sort of understanding of the planning policy behind these particular opportunities that I'm finding aligns, and therefore I'm going to get planning consent for the things I'm proposing. And also that these things are going to stack up financially for me to go and do all of this. And try to get those two things right, send 100 letters out on those opportunities, and then I will translate that into a deal, frankly. So the simple way to do that is to drop into this thing called Elite Plus. So Elite Plus gives you access to a number of these things that we call strategies in effect. And that can be a package of these which make up the commercial conversions, a package of these that make up the residential land and airspace, or a package of these that make up the HMO opportunities that we see. The first one I want to go and look at is the last one, actually, which is the Class MA PD rights. And what I could do with Simon, I don't know if you're still there, and whether you can perhaps do me a favour, and have you got a stopwatch there by any chance?
I can get it on my phone. Yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Well, if you could do that for me, and then once you're ready with that, I just want to prove that I can find something in 90 seconds, and I'm hoping I can do a bit quicker than that. So,
okay, here we go. Three,
two,
one.
Okay. Fabulous. Right. So what we've got here, we've got the Class MA PD rights overlay on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of zoom into a kind of residential area. I'm going to click on some of these, and what's going to show. So I think you can probably stop the clock now, Simon. Actually, so I think I probably found something. So
it was 11. It was 11 seconds 83, and I'm probably a bit slow stopping the clock, to be honest.
So what this is has shown me in effect is that this particular building here is an office building. It's 3,272 square feet.
Looks lovely.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Lovely building. It's then done a bunch of checks behind the scenes of all of this to say, is it listed, is it flooded, and that kind of stuff, to make sure there's nothing that's going to stop me using the new Class MA PD rights across it. It's saying for this particular part of Reading, the sales values on a new build conversion for this is about 420 quid. It's saying the conversion cost probably about 100 quid. So provided a sympathetic conversion, that should stack up nicely. Thanks very much. It's saying that it thinks the rental level for that building is about £15.50. And if I pay 7% net for that, that's £205 a foot. So in essence, what it's saying is that I should be able to buy that building as is for about 670 grand. I should spend 300,000 doing it up. And once I've done that, it should be worth 1.375 million in effect. That gives me a 38% return on cost, which means that that's way in excess of the 25% that I would need in effect. Now, what that means is that because I've got a higher return than I would typically need for a development, it means that some of that return that I've got here, I can actually factor into the price that I pay for the building. So I can share some of that surplus profit over 25%, and I can share that with the owner of that building. So in my head, 38%, 380 grand, broadly speaking, is about £10,000 per percent, and I've got kind of 30. I've got about 130 grand sort of sat extra in profit on this building that I really need to make it stack up at 25% return on cost. So what I can really do is I could probably pay half of that to the owner. I could pay sort of 60, 70 grand more than the 670 as well. I could perhaps pay 750 for it. and actually still be buying it less than it's worth as a residual land value, and still make a 25% return on cost off the back of it.
And Paul, that's a great thing. It's a great point to put in a letter, saying that if you are thinking, I can probably offer you more money than other developers will be able to pay you. And again, that's about the, well, when do they need the money? Because you say, well, if you're a bit flexible, you can wait a bit longer, actually I can give you more than someone else. And for many people, they do want to maximize the profit they make from the property. So it's a really, really good point.
Absolutely. And it is purely about that. It's been preset to know there's more value I can drive into that site in effect. And because I know that if you come on the journey with me, I'll pay you more, but you share the risk with me. You can have 650 now, and we'll kind of arm wrestle up to maybe 670, 675 or something like that. Or you can have 750 if you wait 12 months and I pay for the cost of driving the value into your site. I'm going to get the planning consent for you. It's going to be all positive. I'm going to commit, I'm going to spend money on that, but we'll pay you 750 once I've got the planning consent that I should be able to get for you. Do you fancy that? And it really only comes, again, like Simon said before, we're not going to try and beat them down that route. It's only if they're prepared to go down that route, and it's only if they're answering the right questions on the sort of the pre-qualification call that you're talking about when you send your letters out, to then understand whether that particular owner might do that with you.
Yeah.
The trick then is, well, how do I get these letters out, Paul? Well, the answer to that is that there's some further information on the left-hand side. I can see this is in private ownership. Because it's in private ownership, I can buy a title register here. I click that button, it pops into my basket. Click check out. It's going to charge me £3. Once I've done that, what it will then do is it allows me to, if I just save this particular property to a thing called workflow, what I can then do is I can then use this tool that we have here, which is workflow, to download a schedule of all of these different properties in effect. So I've gone off and I found various properties. I save them into a particular section. I then download that whole workflow into Excel. If I've bought the title register as part of that process, then what it will show me here, this is the workflow that I've got. There's the property that I've just saved into it. It's giving me the details of the property itself. It's giving me the owner's details in private ownership, and I've bought a title register. It will fill that out for me as well. So very quickly, I can mail merge to these little sections here and send out my 100 letters very, very simply and very quickly. Once I've done that, I can then save that and I can send them another letter in 2 or 3 weeks. I can make sure it's that campaign that Simon's been talking about to make sure I'm engaging with these people and that my letter's at the top of the intro and they're going to come back to me with that in effect. So I can manage all of that through through this little workflow section here. Once the letters have been sent, I can nudge them through into the next stage, and lots of things I can do around all of that. So the trick is, well, how do I get 100 of these properties that I can send letters out on, because 100 is the magic number to get a deal bought in effect? Well, as I look across the map, there's really well in excess of 100 just this little area that I'm looking at the moment. So I can go and just, for each one of those, save them into my workflow, send my letters out, put them on a campaign, and I'll then get that trickle of interest coming back to me in effect. That's what I'm interested in commercial conversions. Maybe I want to look at things like Class G. So Class G kind of becomes interesting because this is the shops with uppers as it was in effect. So this is where you've got PD rights to take commercial space above a retail unit and then convert that space into residential. And you can also then back to back that with Class L to build it out for HMOs as well. So I could go from some empty storage space above a shop into 2 flats, and those 2 flats could then become 2 6-bed HMOs using Class L after that in effect. And again, so what this is now showing me, where are all those retail properties across Reading. Off the back of that, it's then looked to say, well, have any of those properties then got extra space upstairs? And what is the value of that space? So for example, this particular property here that I've just picked out, which is sat above whatever that is there. That looks like some sort of retail space on the ground floor with some space above it. In effect, a little bit more information on that. Let's have a look and see what it is. So down here we have a hall with some office space above it. Sorry, and a little bit of banking. I guess look at the back actually. So the banking space there has then got this sort of space above it, which is then where we could then put our residential conversion into the upper parts. In effect, with 2 flats in it, it's saying there's 5,000 square feet up there. So actually, that Class L on the end of that 5,000 feet is quite a lot of space for a bunch of flats upstairs. But what it's saying is that the price to buy it and convert it is £200 a foot, and it's worth 365 once it's bought and converted. So there's clearly an awful lot of profit in that upper floor space. And again, I can share that extra uplift in value with the owner of that particular property. Maybe do kind of a clever scheme on that, which is perhaps give a PD rights to put 2 flats above it, and then with the principle of residential upstairs for the 2 flats, I said, well, actually, I want 6 flats in each of the two floors or something like that, because I've got 5,000 feet, so I probably can get more like 8 or 9 units in that 5,000 feet rather than just 2, and I can go back in having set that principle across that space in effect. So kind of some very quick ways of doing that. So really, there's sort of no excuse anymore for not finding enough opportunities. Let's kind of perhaps paint a slightly different picture. This is showing you the Class G PD rights, so converting from storage space above shops into residential. But we've also talked about HMOs, and we've talked about residential land as well. So perhaps if we just bring to life some of the residential development plots, let's just see what that looks like. So we have a little button here which looks at, so what this button here does is it says, well, are the values in an area high enough to be able to make residential development land work, in effect? Is there a land value in these areas? Of course, in Reading there is. It then looks at the densities of housing around that location. It looks at things like planning constraints around, does it flood, is it listed, and that sort of stuff, to give us a really good chance of unlocking these opportunities, adding additional floor space to them. And what it then does is it sort of looks at those densities. So, well, if they're kind of an eclectic mix of housing in those areas, because that's where we're going to find the opportunity to find a bungalow, knock it down and build 3, or perhaps put a building into the side of it or something like that. And so what we then find is when we then go into these areas where the system is highlighting it, a little thing down here called the OS master map. And what I find is really kind of interesting with this is that when we look in this area here, so for example, if you look at this particular site here and the width of that and the size of building that's put on it, what we see here is actually a very similar size site, but with a fraction of the built space on it. And actually it's really been pre-looked at to say, well, it's not listed, it doesn't flood, it's not in green belt or anything like that. And therefore putting more space onto that in a location here where the values are high enough, so it's already preset that for me, it's saying, well, it's a pretty obvious thing to do. And of course, when you look down this street, there's also things like this and things like this, where clearly with this property here, I could put something much more akin to that on it and really drive those densities up very, very quickly indeed. This bit gets a bit addictive, actually, when you start looking in these areas where it's taking you to, you sort of see these very quick opportunities to infill buildings to the side or to knock stuff down and rebuild an awful lot more. And you start comparing, well, this property here's got this very small garden here and actually, a bit to the back, but actually, is that really being used and what can we put onto that? And it becomes very quick to sort of to see where those opportunities sit with, side gardens here and perhaps a bit down the back here and perhaps something on the front here and this sort of stuff. And so it becomes very sort of down here as well. You get a bit addicted to that. It's kind of quite hard to put this down in effect. Same thing, you just go and save those properties to your workflow and you send your letters out and you then go through the process that Simon's just taken you through. The final thing I suppose we also talked about then was, can we go and find some HMO opportunities? HMOs for me, I want to be building HMOs in areas where the HMOs are. I'm perhaps not confident enough myself to be saying, well, actually, I know this is a great location. I'm going to be the first HMO in that location. I kind of feel that's a pretty dangerous thing to be doing in my own case. So what we have here is we have sort of 2 strategies that you can apply. So what this has done for me is it's gone off and said, well, in that location, are there other HMOs in that area? And if there are other HMOs, then let's have a look at those various properties in that area. When you look at those particular properties, it's saying what's the size of the built space on this site relative to the neighbours, and actually kind of what could I get onto this site relative to what's on there. We've got other HMOs in the area, and then what it's also done is said, well, actually, what's the density of HMOs relative to the number of residential properties that are there, and do I see that number being less than 10%? If I do, then from that, in that 50-metre radius around the particular property, if I see that low density, then the chances are I can then convert that C3 property into C4 or indeed sui generis. And of course, what that then gives me is then a whole list of properties where there are HMOs around it, and that then I could convert these into residential effects. And what it then also does, it says, well, actually, what's the density of those buildings, and where do we see low density properties in effect? And the reason it does that, when we start looking at these particular locations, which is kind of interesting because you've got one here where I could put something at the back of it, which is kind of interesting. when you start looking at some of these properties, what we should be finding is that you see some of them that are kind of much bigger building footprints than others, in effect. So actually, some of these would take an extension off the back. I don't feel that's the best example. Let's just see if we can find something better. I suppose this is perhaps sort of illustrating the point for me in terms of here you can see you've got a particular building footprint that's the same on both sides of those properties. In effect, the size of the title are exactly the same, and yet this one here has got this big extension at the back. So of course, in the case of this, what I probably could do is take what perhaps is a sort of fairly standard sized house. I can then put an extension on the back for perhaps a new kitchen in the back, or a kind of new shared kitchen, lounge, dining room, where the tenants of the HMO are going to kind of congregate, if you like, which then means that the existing kitchen in this particular building could then be converted to a letting room. And so I can start driving those unit numbers up quite comfortably, because I know I can extend the building sort of further than what it's currently got on that site, in effect. And when I compare that, say, to this building, this is a very small building compared with the sort of footprint that's on that one. To give an example of that, that's a 30% site density, and this is a 14% site density, in effect. So I could probably double the size of the ground floor footprint off the back of this particular property, so 75 Tilehurst Road, whereas over here I've got 81, it's actually got twice the density on it, in effect. Not in Article 4, which is very useful, and that then means that I can typically get into that sort of 7 and 8 bed HMOs without too much hassle, quite frankly. But it has run the calculation to say what's the density of HMOs in that area relative to residential properties. So hopefully I've shown you how we can very quickly find a lot of opportunities using the Elite Plus system. There's a whole bunch of stuff we can also do within the Elite Plus system. So one of the things that's always very interesting is that when we've found enough opportunities, you often then run out of money. So at the point at which I've done my site finding, if you like, the challenge I've then got is, well, actually, what happens when I've got too many opportunities, frankly? So what do I do with them? Do I try and raise the money, or do I back to back it? And what do I do with it? So if I'm doing HMO opportunities, what we have here is our planning export. And the planning export searches in a particular council, Reading Council, for these keywords, HMOs and housing multiple occupation effect. When I run the export, what it does, it goes off and it looks for those particular types of planning applications. It looks for properties that have got, or applications that have got HMO in the title, or the proposal of it, in effect. It then links that through to the owner's details, and also looks at who the architect and agent was for those particular properties too. When this downloads, what it's going to give me is, firstly, a list of where are those planning applications for HMOs, but secondly then, who's bought them and what they paid for them. Because what that then gives me is an opportunity then, let me just kind of open this up and perhaps talk to this kind of in slow terms so that it's kind of really clear. Just drop into here. So what we have, the first thing we have is the location where we found the planning application, the reference number for that planning application. There's the proposal for the planning application. So here we've got a use of 5 bed, 6-person occupancy multiple housing multiple applications and C4 use. There'll be a change of use there, C3 to 9-person HMO, etc. There's the date the planning application went in. There's the address of the property, and then here then is the link to the title number for us to go and see some more information around it. So if we want to go right to the owners of these properties, well, there's the title number. Where the property's in company ownership, we provide that on this export for you. Where it's in private ownership, we can go and buy a title register, and that will then kind of fill that out for us. What's then interesting is it tells us the date that it was last sold. So if I go into this section here and say, well, actually, which of these properties that had an HMO planning application put in on it were then sold in the last 3 years, and what it gives me is a list of locally active developers that are buying properties and then submitting HMO planning applications in on them. Which means that if I then find too many opportunities, I have a very simple and interesting conversation that I can make to, for example, Turner Properties Limited. I can ring Turner Properties and say, I saw that you bought this property here at 230 Wokingham Road in Reading. Very interested to see how you know. I saw you put a planning application in August for the change of use from an 8-bedroom guest house into a 9-bedroom HMO. How are you getting on with that? When I ring a company and say I want to talk to the person that's responsible for a particular property, they will 9 times out of 10 accept my phone call, because ultimately what am I calling about? And it's actually their property. They're going to be kind of very keen to kind of accept that call, in effect. The question then is, well, actually, saw you bought that. Were you looking for anything else? Were you looking to fund anything else? Because actually, these people here at Turner Property understand how to build an HMO and understand that Reading marketplace for it, in effect. We also know they paid £760,000 for it. So actually, if we wanted to go and fund a similar sort of deal to the one, the second case study example that Simon showed us, then these people are spending that same kind of money on a similar building in Reading. So therefore, I kind of can get the feel that they're going to be good for the money for the kind of scheme that I'm putting forward to them, in effect. What's kind of also useful probably with this as well is to understand that these people that have bought these properties recently are also then using these agents, these architects and planners, to go and get their HMO planning consents too. So actually what we have is a list then of various people like Pegasus Group and Ramurti Design Limited, I think that's how you say it, who are kind of then clearly doing lots of HMO applications in the councils that I'm looking at, who then, to be fair, if I want to go and get an investor comfortable with the fact that I understand what I'm doing about HMOs in Reading, then these are some really useful people that are going to be part of my design team that's going to make sure they get the right scheme going forward, in effect. So a number of things that we can do. And within the Elite platform, there's also some really interesting stuff that it can do around helping you with your comparables, your HMO comps, your commercial comps, your residential comps, all that stuff, your land comps as well, is kind of really useful through the system too. I feel like I've shown quite a lot of information today. What I really want to do is kind of give you comfort that with something like the Elite Plus system, you can find those 100 sites very, very simply. You can use the workflow to then do your letter campaigning simply. You can manage that follow-up as part of that too, so you can send your multiple letters out at the same time to make sure you're following these things up and you're not missing anything, and creating that campaign rather than sending out a single letter, getting bored, and then not closing this stuff out, in effect. So hopefully I've kind of covered all of that. I feel like I've talked enough now. If anybody would like to kind of see that as a one-to-one demonstration of their particular, I'm conscious that the chat lit up with sort of about 150 people on the webinar at the time, so the chat lit up, and I've only been able to take one of those locations to show the various things in that particular location. If you'd like to see that in your own location, one of our team would be delighted to show you that themselves. What you do is book a call back with us, and there's a bit.ly link there, which is bit.ly/Nimbus callback, and I'll pop that into the chat in a moment. There are 3 Elite packages or Elite Plus packages that you can look at. I've been using the commercial conversions one, residential land and airspace, and of course HMOs too. So particular strategies and groups of strategies that you can use through one of those packages, in effect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the pop the link for that. If anyone would like to book a call back with us to get yourself set up on the Elite system, to have a trial of the Elite, or have a demonstration of the Elite system, and then you can actually have a little trial of it yourself as well if you want to. There's a link in the chat there to allow you to do that. Simon, just a quick reminder of the things we can do with you. Obviously, you've got your masterclass there. I'll let you kind of just explain that again if you can.
Yeah, so basically, obviously, we've touched on just one way. Letters, and thank you, Paul, for that demonstration. Really valuable stuff there. Just shows the power of using that technology to save yourself a huge amount of time and find deals that probably other people aren't finding. So this training, live online training, is all about how to find great deals in your area. We're not going to be covering the technical side you've just gone over now. We took some of the old, more traditional ways to find them, including land or letters, but also I want to show you why you should be doing that and how to actually do it. I want to share some great things you should be saying to sellers, etc. So it's a free training. It's happening very soon, so I would take action. I think one team's going to post the link in the chat box, but you can maybe take a screenshot of this page as well. It is a case-sensitive link, so it's https://bit.ly/ then Nimbus deal finding. And Nimbus and deal and finding all start with a capital letter. Okay, or you just take your phone out right now, hold it over the screen, scan the QR code on your camera, and it'll open a window and you can just fill in the details. So come and join us on the live training. We'd encourage you to do that. And secondly, if you're not been to a PIN meeting, you can go to pinmeeting.co.uk. You can check out all the local meetings, and then the one closest to you, scroll down on that page where you pay normally £20, courtesy of Nimbus Maps. You can come complimentary for your first time. Just come and check it out for yourself. Use the code Nimbus Maps to do that. And finally, if you've not read my book, Property Magic, you really should do. You can go and buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Audible if you prefer to listen, or you can just come, if you want to click on one more, please, Paul, or you can use this link that's on the screen now. And actually just pay package and posting of £3.95. So those are kind of some offers. You want to learn more from me, continue the journey. That's some very simple things you can do. So back to you, Paul.
Fabulous. Yeah, well, the big question now is, are there any questions around all this? So if anyone would like to ask a question of me or indeed Simon, then what I'd like to do, there's a few questions in the Q&A, but what I would like to do first, if I can, is invite you to put your hand up. So in your Zoom control panel, there's a little raise hand button. If you've got a question you'd like to ask, then if you just raise your hand, then we will bring you up here and get you to ask that live for us. So Yayo has put a hand up. Let me just see if we can unmute you there. Hi, Yayo.
Hello, can you see me?
We can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yes.
I'm subscribed to Limbo Plus Max currently. I have a software. Install it, I'm use it. My question is around how to calculate the planning and the development cost. That's my question. I've seen you bring up some costing and also the estimate profit. How do you come out of those figures? That's my questions.
Yeah, sure. So the various strategies look at what's being proposed. So what kind of construction is kind of envisaged. They're a sort of a simplified appraisal, if you like. Typically, what we're looking at with those calculations is kind of typically a 2/3 of new build cost for conversion. For new build, typically sort of a full price. We're sort of quite conscious that build costs have sort of shot up over the last sort of 3-6 months. So we're just going back in and repricing some of that. At the moment, they're calculating off a sort of a 150 a foot new build cost. The Class MA strategy has actually got a higher build cost in London and sort of builds in a regional sort of specific kind of calculation in effect. And that's just being updated and sort of brought up in line with kind of current prices in effect. So the answer is that some of the strategies are kind of looking at 150 a foot new build cost, and which seemed very sensible kind of 6 months ago. And actually sort of as the world's kind of shot up and started shooting up, we're then going back in and repricing some of that. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I would previously have used 150. I'm now using more like 175 per square foot. I think it's probably more realistic for the price increases that we've seen.
Okay. Do you have any document, any somewhere, any software, any platform where you can go and get all the information so you can work on your own, or maybe some spreadsheet, Excel, where we can use as a template to move on for the calculation? Because I'm new to development, so I need to get all the information. And by the way, I've got your books.
My recommendation would be this. So the system does an element for you based on the estimates that have been put in. So it's a rough feel, so you can work out, look, does this make sense? Does it look like it's going to make money, or does it not? And so Nimbus Maps pulls all those things out for you. What I would suggest, if you're new to development, you absolutely want to get a team around you to help you do this. You can make really good money in development. You can also lose a lot of money in development if you don't know what you're doing. So I think you would want, first of all, a good project manager who can really scope on exactly what needs doing to this. You might have a quantity surveyor to help you work out all the costs. You put your schedule together. You'll then go out to tender to hopefully 3 different builders. And finding builders at the moment is difficult because they're in short.
It is.
You know, so these are some of the challenges we face. But here's the good news. A lot of people are doing this at the moment, but a lot of people say, oh, it's too busy, I can't, and they're just not bothering. So I think for those people who are determined and find good deals, there is opportunity out there. It just takes a bit more effort. But yeah, if you're new, my advice, and I'll pause for you on this, would get a team around you who know what they're doing. And a good project will have enough profit in it for you to afford paying these people and planning consultants, etc. It's much better paying these people to get it done properly rather than trying to save money, wing it, do it yourself, and then make expensive mistakes. What would you say, Paul?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the first thing to do is to make sure that when you get to the point of doing that detailed appraisal, you've got a jolly good chance of stacking up. And that's really what Nimbus is trying to get you to, is to say that we've run calculations against this should stack up. When you get to the point of actually doing the work on it, it should stack. What I wouldn't do is entirely rely on that and go and write checks for buildings off the back of what Nimbus strategy says it works and therefore it must. But what you should do when you get to that point, when you start running your detailed comps, when you start getting your building plans drawn up, once you then get those costed by your QS, then they should stack up based on they've had a sort of back of envelope calculation run against them, which means you're in a great place for that.
Okay.
So what I would then be thinking, well, where do I get a decent QS from? Where I get that from is I go and find the right kind of architect, which I would use the planning export that I've just shown you to go and find those architects. And I'd be very mindful of the fact that an architect that I would use for, class G, class L, PD rights to shops with uppers to 2 HMOs would be a very different architect from the one that I would use for, commercial conversion of an office to 30 flats, which is going to be different from the one that would use 50 units on the edge of a settlement on a greenfield development, some sort of strat land kind of thing. And so I would go and pick the right architect, and the right architect then will be on design team meetings regularly that have then got a decent QS and got a decent engineer, structural engineer, decent M&E consultant that they're working with, that then you can ask for them to give you some recommendations too. You find if I get one good member of the design team, the rest of the design team kind of picks itself off the recommendations that they're all offering. And so you would find there's a kind of a close-knit team in each of those areas, probably 2 or 3 of them actually, that these people will kind of chop and change between in effect. But that's how you're going to get a good design team. And off the back of that, often those QSs, if you've got reasonable schemes that seem to stack up, and schemes that you're acquiring or that you're back-to-backing for investing, this sort of stuff, often those QSs will do you a quick cost plan and give you a feel for what those numbers are for that particular building. Often for either not very much or often free actually, provided you instruct them on the project going forward. So I think it's really about Nimbus is sort of refining your sort of focusing in on those opportunities that are going to stack, but making sure you're doing that work in the background and making sure you're asking your QS to give you a proper cost plan or a sort of budget cost plan would be enough at that stage.
Okay, thank you very much. By the way, Simon, I got your book.
Good. I hope you enjoyed it.
I'm still on it. I'm on chapter 3 now, so it's okay.
Yeah, you got to speed up. Won't take long. Focus on reading that book. It's going to help you a lot.
Oh, hopefully it does. It does go left work. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. I think the next question was from Ian. Let's just see if we can get Ian up.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, just a couple of questions. Like when Simon started, I mean, he was really, I think, sort of talking as though the property was on the market. Because you're saying, well, you ask the owners what's motivating them to sell, and so on. Whereas obviously, if you're writing to them just on off market, I mean that's not really the appropriate question, is it? But I mean,
no. But the whole point is they come back to, if they respond to you send them saying, would you like to sell or rent your property? Yeah, I'll come back to saying, I'm not interested now, but thanks for writing to me. Or they might say, yeah, actually, I might be interested in selling.
Right. Yeah.
Because that if they're not interested, they're just not going to come back to you. So the fact they come back to you, there is an interest there.
Right.
So an absolute sell. Okay, so out of interest, why are you thinking about selling?
Right. Yeah. Sure. Just one other question is that, I mean, I think obviously what you're saying to the previous chap is obviously very good point, particularly with costs at the moment. You can't just, with due respect, rely completely on Nimbus Maps figures and so on. And I think, sorry, I've got someone at the door. Sorry, can I come back to you? I've just got
sure.
Yeah, we'll go to someone else.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's always the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, quite. So we got Yomi has a hand up as well. Let's see if we can get Yomi up.
Hi, Simon. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Yomi. How you doing?
Hi there. Thank you very much. Fabulous webinar. I've got questions for both of you, actually, if that's okay.
Sure.
So just to sort of give you background about me, I'm a financial advisor, completely new to this. I'm looking to actually get into this to sort of hopefully at some point move away from financial advice. So I'll start with you, Paul, if that's okay. So my question is, with Nimbus Maps, it looks like an absolutely fabulous tool, but it seems to me like it's one of those tools where you can only get something of value from it if you actually know what you're looking for, if you actually know how to use it. So I guess my question is, how much support do you actually get if you were to sign on to Nimbus Maps? So that would be my question for Paul.
Yeah, sure.
And then
So
okay, sorry, you're going to answer that.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so as part of the Elite subscription, or did the Elite Plus or Elite Max subscriptions, there's a sort of a two-part training session that we run that takes you through top to bottom of the system. It's actually with me, so I run through and talk through all the various things that it's doing and why it's doing it, and how you can use those to kind of to best use it in effect. I'm actually quite cheeky on that as well, because what I do is I show you how to use it in certain areas, and I go and set a bunch of challenges for you to go and do it yourself. And then we come back the following week and we then just check that you've been able to do it in effect. So there's kind of a sort of a two-part training sort of session in effect, and there's actually a third bit if you sort of struggle, then you can come back a third time to ask those questions live and sort of see me doing the challenges that I've set for you in effect. So within all of that, you then have access to all of our customer support. It's worth kind of checking us out on Trustpilot, because they're pretty good at what they do, the customer support team here at Nimbus. And then there's a sort of, when you sign up, there's also a Kickstarter call with one of our team here as well that just kind of helps you with all of that. Lots of people don't need all of that support. That support is entirely optional. It's pretty simple to go and use. I say that there's no magic to me finding 100 sites, or the sites that I did in 90 seconds. It was click two buttons, and the first one I clicked was on profile because of the calculation Nimbus has done in the background for me, basically. So so there's plenty of support, whether you'll need it all or not, but there's loads there if you want it.
Yeah. Is it one of the cases, obviously, like I said, I'm completely new to property development, so would I need to upskill myself? Because when you're talking about class L, class, all those things, I was clueless. I didn't know what you were talking about. So will I need to upskill myself, first of all, to understand sort of those areas first before, then, looking at tools that will help me, succeed, basically?
Yeah, I think you want to know what you're doing before you go off and start writing letters. Simon's got some great training around all of that, so perhaps a question for you, Simon, rather than me. But I think you kind of want to know what you're doing, because you're going to get people ringing you up, and you want to kind of then have credibility to be able to unlock those deals and things.
It doesn't matter if you're new, as long as you know what you're talking about, because I've never ever had anyone ask me what's your experience, because I've just been speaking to them and they can tell I know what I'm talking about from what I'm saying to them. So we have people who are completely new, no experience, and they have they can hold themselves to the landlord because they've been educated well. So absolutely. And also, I mean, my personal view, and I don't know if you'd agree with me here, Paul, we might differ on this, but my personal view is, there's amazing opportunities in developments, and you can absolutely do that. But I would suggest, if you've not done commercial to residential development, or if you've not done any property, going straight into commercial development, residential development is actually quite tricky. I would say maybe do something like HMOs first, which are a far lesser job you're going to do to a property than something you're converting an office into flats and things. So I think, not trying to limit what anyone can do. You can do whatever you want if you get the right knowledge and team around you, but there are certain logical steps you might want to take, Gary. Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
But remember that is that, if you're going to come with a buy-to-let, then your next buy-to-let is either the house with the side garden, you get planning on the side garden, or it's the house you can convert to an HMO, or the buy-to-let you can convert to an HMO that's then going to drive a high yield. So you kind of get your head around that, and then perhaps then you end up in commercial conversions afterwards, rather than sort of jumping straight into the bottom end of that, personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we agree on that. Yeah, great. Did you have another question, Amy?
Yeah, I did. It was just about the PIN meetings. I'm just trying to get my head around it because I go to a lot of networking meetings, but obviously this is slightly different. I'm just trying to understand how it works and what the benefit would be. Because if I'm going to a PIN meeting in the same area, say, because I live in Exeter, so that would be Devon one.
Yes.
If there are too many, if I'm going to a networking meeting with loads of people within that same area, I'm just basically going to meetings with my competitors. So how does it actually benefit?
Well, it's very interesting. And as a financial advisor, when you go to network meetings, often they limit the number of financial advisors. You might only have one financial advisor, so there's no competition per se. And that's where I can see where thinking comes from, Yomi. However, I suggest why not just go and try it for yourself, especially as you can use that code Nimbus Maps and pay nothing. It's just go and give it a try. And I think you'll actually see in the property investing world, it's quite an amazing, abundant environment that doesn't really exist anywhere else. In that actually, maybe you might stumble across the same property someone else wants. There is a little bit of competition sometimes, but actually, when you get to know other people, you might find an opportunity that you can't do on your own, because maybe you don't have the funding or the experience, or someone else there can come in with you, help you do it, and actually they'll both benefit. So far from seeing other people as competitors, you should understand the more people you know in property, I guarantee you, the more successful you'll be. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
So go and don't take my word for it. Go and try it yourself.
I will. Thank you.
It's Ian again. Sorry, can I just come back with one question? Is
Absolutely.
that all right? Yeah,
sure. Yep.
It's just I had someone at the door. Just one quick question is that the other gentleman asked you a very, very central question about costs and of the difficult moment, and you say, get a QS on board and planning consultant, all that stuff, which obviously makes sense. How would you sort of secure the property though? Because obviously, until you're fairly sure of your figures, you can't offer a sort of firm price. I mean, would you go for an option, or how would you
personally, Paul, let's get your view as well. But my view is, right, use Nimbus Maps to do your top level calculation.
Sure.
Right, and that's identifying opportunity. Then I'd look at it and I'd just sense check your number, because hopefully most people put together their own kind of spreadsheet. I know. I think the first gentleman was asking for a spreadsheet. I think it's not a good idea to use someone else's spreadsheet, right, because you don't understand quite the thinking behind it. So it's best to learn how to do this, put your own spreadsheet together. And again, this can be a very top level initial analysis. So yeah, that looks like it makes money. Here's the kind of profit I want. You work backwards. Here's the profit I want. Here's the cost of building. Here's the finance cost, etc., etc. So you work out what you can afford to pay for that. Then you go into negotiation with the owner and say, right, okay, whatever, here's what I can offer. You make an offer, and then I would make it subject to, and it could be planning or whatever it might be, because often we're looking to add value to these properties anyway. You might be using permitted development, in which case it's fine, or you might have to get some planning. So I'd put the offer in. Once it's accepted, I would secure that. Now you can either exchange subject to planning, which gives more certainty to the seller. However, if you don't get the satisfaction of planning, you can change. But be careful when you exchange, because you are committing. Much better is a purchase option. And in fact, many commercial properties and land is secured on purchase options.
Right.
They come from the world of commercial property, and then we've just started to use for the last 15 years in residential, which isn't as well known. A lot of solicitors don't understand purchase options, but in commercial, they're very familiar. Does that make sense? Right.
So yeah, I mean, because basically what you're saying, and I mean, you're not really going to be sure, because you could go ahead and do a whole load of due diligence and obviously use QS and all that sort of stuff. But all these people need to be paid, don't they? So you could do a lot of work, and then and then find the guy turns around and says, yeah, very nice, but not interested, thank you. Or,
so you wouldn't want to go, what you're getting to, you're right, sorry, you wouldn't want to spend lots of money if you haven't secured that deal, because they might change their mind or sell to someone else. So I would only start spending that money. And again, the more experienced you get, you kind of get a good feel. So I would still sense check things, but I would absolutely secure the property with an option. And if you can't secure it with an option, that's probably too much risk.
Right. Yeah. So the guy's got to be susceptible to an option.
And why would they do that? Because we asked that great question. do you want to get the money in the bank as quick as possible, or do you want to get as much as you possibly can?
Right.
If they are being flexible and give us flexibility on the terms,
Right.
actually, and we might be able to pay them a bit more money.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, would the option specifically sort of depend? I mean, as you say, you know, you've gone to the drawing board, you've done your ballpark figure, so you've got maybe a rough idea of how much you'd be prepared to offer for the property. Would the option mention that specific figure, or
Absolutely, an option
would? Yeah.
But so there are several things you need in an option. First of all, you have your name and address, or if you're buying a company, whoever the buyer is, the company, legal entity, and the seller's name and address.
Right.
You have the property address on which you're talking about, and maybe the title number of that, so it's really clear.
Yeah.
And you have the actual purchase price that you're agreeing to buy at.
Right.
You'll have the length of the option period. Now, an option, you know, it might be a 6 month, it might be a 3 month lockout clause because maybe you're flipping on someone else. It could be a 6 months if you're getting planning, or it could be years and years. You know, land bank is often 20-year option they have on land. Okay.
Okay.
And then there's always an option fee, an upfront consideration must be at least £1 to get a legally binding contract.
Yeah. I've heard of that.
And then always, it kind of, if you got to think of the seller's point of view, they want certainty, they want to sell this property. And the fact that they've sat down and signed a piece of paper gets them to feel a bit more committed to it and psychologically committed to it. Now, we always suggest if you're going to have a longer option, we always recommend that you and the seller get legal advice to make sure you're both really clear.
Yes.
And if you've both had legal advice, then that is what we call an enforceable option. Okay.
Right.
Change that order, went to court, you can show you both the legal advice, it's harder for them to get that turned over. Whereas if you just sat at their kitchen table and signed a piece of paper, although it's a legally binding contract, they could go to court, they could say, oh, Ian promised me this, and make up a whole load of stuff. And the judge might say, well, actually, I think Ian, you've been unfair, let's kind of rip this contract up. But if you both had solicitors and legal advice, it's much harder for them to claim they didn't know what they're doing, because their solicitor will say, look, do you understand you're agreeing to sell all this property for this price? It might be worth a lot more. You've got to do these things properly, Ian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I mean, that makes it clear. And of course, I think, you know, what Paul has said maybe on this webinar and previous ones, if you get a very positive vibe from the owner, and you can almost all work together, hopefully, and you know, if you establish a good rapport, then that's half the battle, isn't it? But obviously, with an option agreement, you would need to get it legally drafted. So
yes. So
both sides are comfortable with it.
Let me give you one point that picks up on what you said, and something that Paul said earlier, is that, you know, you can actually joint venture with the owner. So someone's got a site, they don't have the money or the inclination or the knowledge to develop it. You go and find them, and you would enter into effectively a joint venture, which is an option agreement that says they get a certain amount of money, and then you might put some money, you get that back, and then over and above there might be some sort of split. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're buying something to flip on and develop, it's a great way of doing it, because if you bought it in, you'd have to pay stamp duty.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Get a load of money. Well, if you're doing that, you could, as an absolute minimum, you could say, I could give you X amount more if you're flexible on when you actually get the money. And that X amount is what you would have paid in stamp duty if you bought it. You can pay direct to the owner. It's not costing you any more money.
No.
But it's an extra revenue you can give to them. And you're not having to get a mortgage. You're not having to put a big deposit in. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Completely.
Right, gents, I'm going to have to play the bad guy here, because we have a hard stop 3 minutes ago.
Thank you, Simon. That's
we're now late for. Thank you, Ian. Love to speak to you again.
Sorry, Paul, I get carried away when you're sort of talking about these exciting creative stuff.
Absolutely. Well, 3 minutes ago, my last job to do was, and now is now, was to firstly thank you, Simon, for your time today. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for asking me, Paul. It's a pleasure.
Fabulous. And thank you all for watching. Hope it's been useful today. We've certainly enjoyed ourselves, albeit we have run over slightly. So thank you very much indeed for watching. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best. Bye for now.